Okay, here we are once again. This is the Otherppl show. I'm Brad Listi. I'm your host. I'm in Los Angeles. How you doing out there? Thank you for being here. I have a great episode for you today. My guest is Sanjena Sathian, author of the new novel Goddess Complex. It is available from Penguin Press. Goddess Complex is a darkly funny, wild, at times surprising novel about the dilemmas of womanhood, procreation, pregnancy, and parenting. It manages to be both a psychological thriller and a biting feminist satire. And I had a lot of fun meeting Sanjena Sathian, who is making her debut here on the Otherppl show. So that conversation is coming up momentarily. Today's episode is brought to you by Random House, publisher of Bibliophobia, the new memoir by Sarah Chihaya. Bibliophobia is the official March pick of the Otherppl book club. That is my book club. If you want to sign up for my book club, you can do that at otherppl.com, this show's official website. I loved Bibliophobia. It's an outstanding debut memoir about Sarah Chihaya's family, her childhood, her struggles with mental illness, and her intense relationships with books, among other things. So check it out. Go get your copy. It's called Bibliophobia, and it is available from Random House. Don't forget that I do a weekly email newsletter. If you want to sign up, you can do so over at Substack, bradlisti.substack.com. You'll hear from me once a week in your inbox. I'll let you know about the latest episodes of this podcast. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. Also, I have a new company in the works. It is called Deep Dive, and it specializes in the creation of long-form educational audio. So what does that mean? Well, Deep Dive's debut course, which will be launching later this year, is called How to Write a Novel. I'm the host, I am the interlocutor, and the course features more than 50 hours of never-before-heard conversations with dozens of today's leading writers, people like Emily St. John Mandel, Steve Almond, Vivi Ganeshananthan, Melissa Broder, Madeline Lucas, Lynn Steger-Strong, Tiffany Clark Harrison, Matthew Salasis, Matt Bell, Purchista Hakpur. The list goes on. So check out Deep Dive at deepdive.audio on the internet. Follow Deep Dive on Blue Sky and Instagram. I'll keep you posted here on this show as well. So my guest once again is Sanjena Sathian. Her new novel is called Goddess Complex. It is available from Penguin Press. Sanjena is the author of the critically acclaimed debut novel Gold Diggers, and she is an alumna of the Iowa Writers Workshop. So much fun meeting her and talking with her about her life and her work, and I'm very pleased to be able to share our conversation with all of you right now. So here we go. This is me talking with Sanjena Sathian. But you were saying you were born in Chicago.
I was born in Chicago in the height of the Bulls' success era. My early memories are sitting up late, even when we moved to Atlanta, being allowed to watch the Bulls play.
That's good. I mean, that, like, as a sports fan, I cannot imagine anything more satisfying than being a fan of the Chicago Bulls during the height of Michael Jordan.
Totally. I don't watch basketball anymore, and now I only follow English Premier League football, and my team is Tottenham Hotspur, and they are long suffering. So I need to go back to whatever magic I had as a fan in my childhood.
That was like Haley's comment. I say this not all the time, but whenever it comes up, I always like pound the table and say Michael Jordan is the best basketball player that ever lived. And if he were playing today, he would be just as dominant and would win just as much. Like he was a total unicorn. He was incredible. I mean, I watched all those years of basketball, and he's just such a. Did you see the documentary about the Bulls, on that multi-part documentary?
No, my brother was watching it. I found it, as a former journalist, I found it offensive that he was allowed to be the executive producer of his own story.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
he's definitely controlling the messaging. But like the thing about him that fascinates me is like how insanely, like pathologically competitive he is. To this day, he still holds
Yeah.
grudges about stuff that happened like on a basketball court 27 years ago. That's
I saw the
crazy.
meme and I took that personally.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So you're growing up in Chicago and you're, I guess, like what, elementary school? Like when did you move to it? You moved to Atlanta at a
We
certain
moved to
point.
Atlanta when I was pretty young. So I think the Bulls fandom like carried over into our early years in Atlanta because we moved here when I was like 3 or 4.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and then yeah, you're from the Midwest.
Yeah, I was born in
Yeah.
Milwaukee.
Yeah. I listened to your Curtis Sittenfeld episode and you guys were bonding over Midwesternness. That was a great episode. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, she
Um,
I think that there is something about people from the Midwest that is very like discernible to me. And I think that there's this, like that old joke, like, are you hitting on me or are you just from the Midwest? Have you ever heard this? Like
no.
there are people like from the Midwest, there's just like a friendliness, like an openness and like just a willingness to just like chat that I feel like maybe doesn't happen as much in other parts of the country.
Yeah, my true like I'm not from the South in the way that white people are from the South or Black Americans are from the South, but I am from the South in quotes because I spent most of my childhood here. So actually, Midwestern friendliness and Southern friendliness feel very different to me. There's like a lot more performance and like big bright eyes and bright smile in Southern performance. So when I moved to Iowa, I thought everyone just didn't like me, but it turns out there's just less performance.
Yeah, I mean, okay, because my parents are from the South, so I have like roots down in Louisiana, and I grew up with like I had come from a very big family, most of whom are in the South. So Southern culture is something with which I'm familiar, and there is a social grace. Okay, see, this is actually really difficult to parse because there is a social grace to Southern people that I sort of admire. There's like an ease with which they like invite you over or like make you a sandwich. Like that kind of stuff that like I don't know, can be difficult for other people comes very easily to Southern people. And there's this issue of being nice versus being kind.
Yeah.
Like maybe there could be an argument made that like Southern people are very nice, but they're not always super kind. The same exact thing could be said for people in Los Angeles. Like very nice, or yeah, very nice, but not necessarily super kind. Or you go to like a place like New York and it's like not very nice, but actually kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you
That
know
holds up. That
does
holds
that?
up. Yeah.
But Iowa, but what was Iowa? Iowa was like because I don't know if it necessarily is completely clean in terms of how to characterize regions. I guess it just comes down to individual people. But
I mean, Iowa is an interesting place in that, like, it was the first state to legalize same sex marriage, I think. And, like, I think it went to Obama twice and then was Trump country by the time I moved there. Like, there's, like, ideological complexity in a way that I think translates to social interactions. Like, I think I was just watching the Minneapolis season of Love is Blind, where all these people didn't align politically and they were just like, okay, at first. I think that's kind of an Iowa attitude, too, that it will be okay if everyone is different. But that is also the kind of attitude that you can have if you are part of the dominant culture. It's like easier to have that attitude. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer, but I found Iowa a really fascinating place to live for a couple of years. I felt very alien there.
yeah, so that was for the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Yeah.
Did you like it?
I had a great time. MFAs get a bad rap. Did you get an MFA?
I did.
Where did you go?
USC.
Okay.
The the program is like defunct now. It was sort of like a fraudulent like grifter scheme.
But it's a PhD program now, isn't it? And it's a really good one.
Well, not the one that I went to. The one that I like,
Oh.
there is a program there that remains, but the one that used to be there, it was called the Masters of Professional Writing because it was cross pollinating. It was like screenwriting but the guy who ran it was sort of, I don't know. He was eventually like escorted off campus, is what I heard.
Oh, That's wild.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really
But I mean,
wild.
I had a great time. I met a lot of people that I'm still friends with, and I had time to write. So it kind of
Yeah.
served its function, but
Yeah.
it was
That's how I
not
feel about Iowa.
it was not Iowa. I mean, in terms of its prestige and its funding, I should say.
Yeah. Yeah. The funding makes a difference, but I think MFAs get a really bad rap, but like I talk to a lot, I teach, and whenever I talk to students who are sort of torn up about it, I just feel like the answer is if someone will pay you to hang out for 2 years and basically live as a professional writer, like professional writers don't get that time and community, and also like ego validation that someone thought that you were good enough to just write for a couple of years, or like just write and teach, or just write and edit a literary journal. Like I think that's invaluable. So I'm a big advocate of the MFA, and Iowa's is actually a pretty big one. So the thing I liked about it was that there were a lot of different kinds of people writing really different genres, which is not how it used to be.
Has it grown?
I think it was just that in the Frank Conroy era, there was one particular kind of psychological realism that thrived, and it was like a famously cutthroat place. Like there apparently used to be a list every week of like rankings of how quote unquote good people were, like at the end of every single week. Sam Chang, the director now, has not only eliminated that kind of thing, but like has gone to great lengths to equalize funding so people aren't like kind of competing with each other over who has the more prestigious fellowship. Like people, the teaching assignments are like more equitably distributed. And more than anything, I think she's done a really good job with all kinds of diversity, including aesthetic diversity. Like there were people writing very different kinds of fiction there, which meant people did not always understand each other and people were not always nice in workshop. But I do think that that is pretty rare, that there is actually like, I don't think there's as much of a dominant Iowa style anymore as there historically was.
That seems healthy.
Yeah. Yeah. Way to go, Sam.
What about your particular aesthetic? Like, how would you characterize it? Because it's not the Frank Conroy like realism, though there is some of it. I mean, your book is kind of a hybrid. I think that's why I'm asking, is because it combines things, and I'm curious to know if you have like a take on what you're doing.
I have written some short fiction that is, I don't know if it would, get the Frank Conroy stamp of approval, but I've written like epiphanic psychological realist short fiction. That is a genre that it's not the first genre that I reach for, but I've done it. I really love a lot of those writers. Like Carver was a foundational influence for me. Also, so was Murakami, who loves Carver and I think translates Carver. Murakami is a weirdo who's opening portals in the middle of Tokyo, and all of his books are about like cats and spaghetti. But there is a kind of like realism to his magic. So I think loving both of those two writers equally is like a kind of good example of where I come from. Like similarly, like Rushdie and say like Amy Bender and Toni Morrison on the one hand for non-realists, and then like Roth, Franzen, and Zadie Smith for realists. Like I feel like I always have kind of two columns of influence. And my first book was like a kind of social realist novel. It was a socially realist immigrant novel, and it was drawing on magic realism. And then this one is, I think, a kind of psychologically realist thing that plays with the tropes of autofiction, but obviously it does not end up being autofiction. And then is also in conversation with like the uncanny and horror. So having both of those things like bump up against each other is really helpful for me. And at Iowa, like socially, that was reflected in the fact that there was sort of a spec fic clique and a realist clique. And I was equally friends with like two of those crowds. And I continue to have two kind of readers, two genres of readers.
You were the bridge.
I can bring us all together.
That's right. You were the unifying force. So, but I think that magical realism, if that's what we're going to call it, that realism does have to be there. I think that that's like part of the reason why when books of that kind are effective, that's why they're effective, is because they're grounded and people feel like they do have their bearings and they do have some sense of orientation. And then when you depart from that, it can be thrilling.
I completely agree. And that is, I think what's missing in some kinds of like early student fantastical work that I see is they've forgotten that I think the real reason to depart from reality is to better explain reality. But the thrill of entering a work of non-realism is encountering yourself in this altered world and realizing how the unreality can comment on reality and how reality can kind of in turn comment on unreality. And I think in the end, genre is fake, but it has some things to offer us about like the sort of pleasures and permissions of what each form of fiction can do.
I feel like almost any good novel is some kind of hybrid.
I also feel this way. I do not think that that is what publishing wants right now, which is a little bit scary. I don't know. Do you agree?
Wait, what does publishing want? Let's get to the bottom of this.
I think that it is simpler to be able to have a novel that is one kind of thing and fits into one kind of camp so they can reach one kind of reader, because there is a vision of marketing that assumes that there is kind of one kind of reader. Like there's like identity-based marketing. Like I've had conversations with people on this book tour where like I had a conversation with someone who started out by saying like almost apologetically that he did not think he was the target audience for this book as a straight white man. And I was like, hold up, if you're not the target audience for this book, am I the target audience for like most of literature? No, that's a silly way to read. I think most people who love to read agree that's a really silly way to read. But I do think like it's just hard to reach readers right now. And so in that era, it becomes, I have heard, easier for people to try and kind of sell books that are doing one thing at a time. I am incredibly lucky that I turned in this weird thing to my editors and they were like, sure, we're on board. Like, we will work with you to put this into the world. But there was a huge risk that they would have been like, what is this?
Well, let's talk about it. This is your second novel?
Yeah.
Was it difficult, like this like sophomore novel thing, like following up your debut, which was successful, and then having to come up with the next thing? Did you struggle?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if you agree, I feel like a sophomore novel is like I've heard that it's the hardest. It was harder than the first one for me.
That's usually, I think like the first one is usually the culmination of like a lifetime, or at least like many years of work and apprenticeship and life experience. And you sort of, a lot of writers kind of use up everything they've got to get that first book off the line. And then you're done with it. And it's like, what's next?
That's exactly kind of that was a feeling I had. I also, on like a kind of material level, I was not wondering about what was next because I often finish, in quotes, projects early, put them aside, start a new thing really sloppily, and then turn back to the original thing and realize it needs work. So I had some like drawer material that became this book. So I knew I was interested in writing about a character who was going to share parts of my name with me and who was going to have some weird experiences and relationships. And I think one of my tricks maybe for getting around the sophomore novel slump is that this, I think in some ways, is like a second debut because I wrote the first novel and it's from the perspective of a teenage boy and then he's like an adult man. And I was using a decent bit of autobiographical material in that book, but I was telling it from the perspective of someone who shared some things with me, but like identifiably on the page was not me. And there was a lot of gender stuff that I didn't touch because I was writing from the perspective of like an Indian son who is going to be blissfully and blithely unaware of a lot of the stuff that Indian women think about. And so when I turned to this new project, I had all of this material that was also still saved up from years that I maybe just wasn't as in touch with in the first book. So that was both a gift. That was both a gift and a curse, because I think the other part that was hard is I found it really hard to write from a female voice.
Wait, why?
It's $1 million question. I am a, cisgender woman. There was something very freeing about writing from a male POV, probably in part because a lot of my foundational influences, like many women who grew up reading in a slightly different era, a lot of my foundational influences were men. And the narrators who kind of lived with me were like Holden Caulfield and like Jack Burton from All the King's Men and Nick Carraway. And I think I had almost thought in a like male voice for a long time. And then when I started writing this, I had a kind of moment of almost dissociation where I started to sound more like these like newer novels that were coming out, kind of fragmentary, minimalist, almost like opaque, autofictional women. And I really like a lot of those books, but they were not foundational influences. And I was doing this thing to my sentences. I was like shrinking them. I was sounding really staccato. And I had sort of deprived my female character of the right to sound like as free as I think I had been with my male character, which was an interesting, weird thing. And once I figured that out, that actually became kind of part of the substance of the book, was like thinking about the ways in which womanhood, whatever that means, like constrains us, and how kind of constructs of what we think women are supposed to be kind of end up shaping us. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that gets to the heart of it. This is definitely a book about like a woman's liberation or her quest, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was wondering as I was reading it, because this is a novel, I think you touched on this a moment ago, where the protagonist shares your name, but I think spells it slightly differently.
Yeah. Her first name is Sanjena, spelled Sanjana, and I spell it with the second A as an E. And then she has a slightly different last name from me as well.
Right. And so I was thinking of the Philip Roth novel. Since you mentioned Roth, I was thinking about, is that Operation Shylock? Is
Operation
that the one?
Shylock is like the most important book that this is in conversation with.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Did I come up with that on my own?
I'm so happy if you did. One other person, the Publishers Weekly person, also like loved Roth and saw that. But there are like things that are weird about this book that are slightly less weird, maybe, if you know Operation Shylock, like why it makes it, we can get there, but like why it makes a weird, crazy turn at one point that I like fully stole from Roth.
Okay, yeah, because this is, I mean, I think I would call it a doppelganger novel.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you writing about a slightly tweaked version of you. And then that version of you, that slightly tweaked version of you, goes on to meet like a mirror, like a funhouse mirror version of you. You know what I'm saying? There's layers to this. And then the book, as you mentioned, your novel takes like a hard kind of magical realism horror novel turn about, what is it, about halfway through? I don't know exactly.
I think it's exactly halfway.
Okay. So, and that was Roth inspired.
Yeah. I mean, more like I wanted to do that and I needed justification. And I thought a lot about like Operation Shylock. We meet Philip Roth as he's being haunted by someone who is calling himself Philip Roth and like kind of inhabiting his life, taking over his likeness and like messing with him. And then it becomes a spy novel. And the sudden jump to being a spy novel is a weird, crazy plot thing. And I think we kind of live in an age of like, at least for the last 10 years, there's been like a lot of minimalist plots, kind of plot light stuff. And I really love plot. I think dramatic complication is like how we embody the themes that are at play in any book. But also plot is really risky, right? You could try a thing on the page and people might say, I don't believe that would happen, or this is too far or too weird. Plot, particularly if you kind of enjoy the dramatic elements and you're not someone who just does like plot as character and action, like I also subscribe to that idea. But if you make a weird, crazy turn like this book does, and I did in this book, it can feel really risky. And so I think I like took solace in writers who have enjoyed making weird, crazy turns in their work before and making what my friend, the novelist Lee Cole, calls like a violent craft move. Yeah.
So I guess like when you were working on the book and you made the decision to make this like violent craft move, I'm just curious to know, like, how much trial and error was there? Did you get to a point where you're like, what have I done? I'm projecting my own neuroses onto this process because it's a roll of the dice, and it's also a lot of work. that you're taking on, because you're kind of blending two different kinds of stories together and trying to kind of fuse it in a way that feels seamless. Like, did it ever get dark for you where you were like, yeah, she's
Yeah, of
nodding.
course. So, I mean, the kind of official origins of this book are that I started a version of it that was told from the perspective of a character named Sanjena, who I originally spelled her name the way I spell my name. And she was living in Bombay. She was an expat, and she encountered this charismatic man named Killian, and then discovered that he had been married to a woman with her name right before her. And she was going to kind of discover what had happened that caused their marriage to fall apart. I thought of it as kind of a retelling of Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, which is like a great double story. It's not stylistically the way I write. Like, I don't do the sort of like lyrical, lush Gothic story. But the problem with that, I sold an incomplete manuscript. I sold the first 150 pages of that. And I said, I have 150 pages left. In the second half, I will do a head hop, and I will write from the perspective of the other Sanjena, the kind of original Sanjena. And she'll be an anthropologist. She will come back to India, and the two Sanjenas will confront one another. And there's going to be this revelation about who Killian was. And I sold that, went on book tour, kind of virtual book tour for my first book, and then came back to the pages about 3 months later. And I knew that there were some problems with them. I had good notes from my editor who sort of said, I think you can do it, but here are some thoughts I have about what might be a problem, but come back to me when the whole book is done. And I looked at those pages again and realized that the entire novel was going to hinge on kind of the revelation that a shitty man was a shitty man. And it was not an interest. I was not doing anything with that information. It was just kind of a flat twist. And I wasn't getting out of the material. And the whole book was going to end up being about this character Killian, when actually the people I was interested in were these two women. And then I also started writing in the voice of the anthropologist character, Sanjena with an A. And she was older. She was like more fully formed. And I liked writing from the perspective of this person who already knew kind of the truth that her husband was stupid. And it was much more interesting to start from that premise. And so I threw away those first 150 pages, started the whole book over, killed off the original Sanjena, gave myself freedom to reinvent Killian as needed. And then I wrote what is now the first half of the book. And by that point, I had already kind of made one violent craft move, which is like throwing away half a book. Then by that point, I was kind of just like, all right, I will try anything to make this work. And there is a version of this book that stays in the mode of the first half that I kind of played with. And I think it could have worked, but there was something I needed to do for the character's sake. I needed her to be pushed out of herself. And I couldn't see how to push her out of herself unless I sent her somewhere weird and crazy and isolated her from society, which is what happens in the second half of the book. And so I just stuck with it out of necessity and kind of dealt with the consequences later and realized like, okay, this is now the kind of non-negotiable architecture of the book. So how do I make it work?
Like, so much of what you're saying brings to mind this issue of like creative writing and imagination and the freedom that we should have as writers to sort of follow the flights of our, I mean, obviously it's got to work, but I think we can often feel bound to reality, or we can feel restrained, or maybe like a little bit hesitant to take off in these directions. And it seems like that's what you were kind of negotiating with yourself. Like you had to sort of unbind yourself from whatever expectations you either had for yourself or imagined others would have for you.
Yeah, totally. I am kind of an extroverted people pleaser. And so I do actually spend, I think, a lot more time in the outside world than some of my more introverted writer friends who I think are better at shutting out the world. And so I like really let the world in, which includes letting in people's judgments. Like I was always doing battle with different imagined versions of my first novel. I had a version of it that was successful in my head. And I thought, oh, I have to recreate that success. And then I had a version of it in my head that it was a total flop and everyone hated it and everyone saw that I'm a fraud. And so this book has to be my chance to make up for that and prove that I'm not a hack. And like neither of those things are completely true, or I don't know. But I was always kind of fighting with both versions of myself and also things I feared about how people in publishing would read me, things I feared about how anyone would encounter like certain risks I was taking. Like, was anyone going to just see this as too weird for like literary fiction? Were they going to decide that it was like too teetering close to horror? Or was anyone going to see the horror elements? They were only going to see the sort of like literary autofictional playment elements. There's just nothing you can do about when your anxiety spiral gets that big. It just you just have to ride it.
So I'm curious, now that the book is out in the world and people are reading it and responding and there's been reviews and so on, I know some writers don't read reviews, though. I think some claim to not read them and they're not telling the truth.
I think they're lying.
But I'm curious to know if the reception of the book so far has like matched your expectations or deviated from them in some way.
I have been like very surprised to find people getting it. I think I just thought this was going to be a tiny, strange novel that people didn't understand. And actually, I think the thing I was most concerned about was not this like genre craft thing that we're talking about. That was something I was thinking about. But it's a novel told from the perspective of a childless, like early 30-something millennial woman who has some like hostile stances toward childbearing at the start of the book. And that is kind of a prototype. That is the most unlikable kind of woman I can kind of imagine in the cultural imagination, particularly right now. And I was especially worried about the way the book might be received by people who are parents, and particularly by mothers. I think especially in my generation, there's a kind of like reclamation happening of what it means to be a mother and to be like proud of that identity and also have a realistic relationship with that identity. And I think there's so much imaginative work going on in my generation to kind of claim that or reclaim it. And here I am coming out with a book that if you just read the opening pages, you would think like this woman hates all mothers and maybe hates all women. And like, we don't want to read this.
Well, I want to stop you. Because I find like the character that we're talking about is the first doppelganger, like the first Sanjena. It's kind of the more autofiction-y Sanjena on the page. And there's a very, like something we haven't talked about is that there's a very strong comedic element to this book and her, like the portrayal of her on the page. I don't know if you intended that, but that's how I read it. I was like, she's kind of a misanthrope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so like, and you were going for it. I mean, you were going for some laughs, like some dark laughs, and like, she's kind of cutting against conventional expectations, familial expectations. She's kind of the black sheep of her family, kind of the ne'er-do-well daughter who's sort of trying to forge her own path, right?
Yeah, accurate.
And there's some really like kind of body humor and like sexual comedy. That must have been fun to write.
Yeah, it's fun, and it is the ultimate, like, I think, like, let it rip, see what happens. Hopefully it's funny to other people, but it's funny to me.
I mean, that's usually the best barometer, right? If you're laughing while you're writing, then at least a few other people will join you, right? I would imagine.
I don't actively laugh when I write, but I do. I think it's actually more like foundational. Like, I don't go through and kind of punch up with jokes the way some people I know do, because I actually don't think, like, I'm not the kind of person, if you put me in the SNL writer's room, I wouldn't land jokes. What I do with humor, I think, is more situational. Like, it has a lot to do with the like foundational tension in a scene. So if I've picked a humorous situation, then I can play.
And we should also mention that Sanjena's spouse, Killian, like desperately kind of wants a child, right? There's this tension between the man who wants the baby and the woman who doesn't. And that's not something I've seen a ton of in contemporary fiction, like that particular scenario. Like certainly it exists, but I just haven't seen a ton of it in fiction. Maybe I'm probably
Yeah,
missing
no,
it.
I think you haven't, but it's hilarious because it's the situation for a huge number of my friends. I just think maybe this is a millennial thing, or maybe it's millennials just being louder. But a part of what I found interesting, I mean, I was in a relationship with someone who wanted 5 children, and I seriously considered it and then realized I really didn't want any. So I came to it sort of like through a like deeply personal embodied place, but then I looked up in my early 30s and realized that a lot of people I know, including people who did kind of say they wanted children, women who said they wanted children, women in relationships with men were repeatedly encountering the fact that men seemed to believe that the babies would just appear. Like it was as though they had not, there was like missing not like sex ed, but social sex ed. Like they didn't seem to understand how much was required to like financially set up, but also more importantly, bodily set up. And I grew up of a generation that egg freezing went commercial the year that I graduated from college. So there were kind of unprecedented levels of access to fertility technology, longer conversations about when and whether and how to have children. And then I know just a lot of men who were like, well, sure, they'll happen. And like, there'll be that biological clock that kicks in and then we'll have them. And that doesn't happen for a lot of people. And so then there are prolonged fights and prolonged decision-making processes. And I thought that was way too interesting to not look into.
It's like, you hear this all the time where people are like, shit, like they're either newlyweds or they're in a relationship and they're on their way to getting married and they're talking about, or a lot of times it's somebody's pregnant or they have a baby and it'll be like, what kind of world are we bringing them into? Like, you got to be honest. I mean, I've had that talk, like where at least that thought, but I've got 2 kids and it's like, well, you got to make the best of it now. I feel like there is some part of me that grieves. I don't know how you could possibly be looking at reality and not feel a little grief stricken over what's going on in the world. It can seem like, just like at a purely logical level, I guess you could be like, wow, why would anyone do this considering how bad things are? But I also I can bristle, I can feel angry where it's like, well, the answer isn't that people should just stop having children. The answer is that we need to make the world a better place so that people can bring children into the world and not have to feel so like existentially like guilt ridden and, torn. That's like such a sad state of affairs. It shouldn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I think that like the state of the world is definitely one part of the conversations that a lot of my friends are having when they're thinking about having children. But a lot of the conversations are like much more kind of like physical and bodily. It's like I have a friend who she and her male partner do want children, or at least a child. And a lot of their conversations have just been about the fact that it is unfair that her body will have to do things that his body will not. And that feels really like a violation to her. Like, she is not someone who wants to be pregnant. She is deeply uncomfortable with it, and she is deeply uncomfortable with like what will be required of her body after giving birth. And she knows that some of those things are temporary, but that is a big part of the conversation. And that's kind of the world that this book is living in. It's about the mental space and the bodily experience of Sanjena, the narrator, gets pregnant thinking she maybe kind of wants, she's very ambivalent. She like, it's almost intentional, almost not, and then has an abortion, which is then kind of causes her to deal with a lot of confusion. And that's kind of the headspace that I was really interested in. It's not kind of these external conversations, but the deeply internal ones that people don't think are okay to talk about.
The body stuff.
Yeah, the body. That's how they get here.
Well, I mean, it's you got to go like the Hollywood route. Like the new Hollywood route is to just outsource it and like just pay for a surrogate. If you have like an extra $150,000, you can get somebody else to carry your child to term for you.
There is a queer family abolitionist writer named Sophie Lewis who wrote a book called Full Surrogacy Now: Feminism Against Family, that is in part about, it's a defense of surrogacy, which like both the right and the left really don't like surrogacy for the most part. Like people on the left see it as kind of exploitation, which it can be. And people on the right don't like it because it like helps queer people have families and it's like not quote unquote normal. And she wrote this kind of impassioned defense of a utopian vision of surrogacy. She also investigates all the abuses in the way surrogacy exists today. But she has some really interesting hot takes in there. I don't agree with all of it, but I spent a lot of time reading thinkers like her who people who want to say like the way, kind of what you're saying about the external world, the way the external world is set up is wrong and we all know it, and it's way too hard if you do want to have children to raise them and afford them and like have help for them and believe in their future. And it's also really hard if you decide not to have children, kind of more on an imaginative level, to figure out what your life should look like. And thinkers like people like Sophie Lewis are sort of out there saying like, let's think about a lot of different possibilities. And that's that kind of like mind expanding, like intellectual experiments in utopian family were really interesting to me as I was writing this.
What's a utopian family?
I mean, her vision is if you pay people for surrogacy, it has like you're treating it as labor and it has like all of the kind of protections of labor. She says that we should think about decoupling, like literally gestating a child from raising a child, which means that like maybe those aren't the two people, the same person may not do both of those jobs, and that might still make a family, which requires imagining like 3-parent families or like 4-parent families. Like it's a very kind of like queer collective. She also thinks that The Handmaid's Tale is a description not of a dystopia but of a utopia, and that Margaret Atwood got it wrong and she should have like reimagined this kind of like what it would be like if there were some women who were wives and some women who were contracted to carry children, which is, I think, just kind of a hot take. But it's really interesting to read her literary criticism and just be in the presence of someone who thinks boldly. I thought about that a lot in the second half of the book because there is kind of an experiment in alternative family construction happening in the second half that I think people will have different reactions to. Some people might, I talked to someone yesterday who said, I kind of wanted this character to do something different when she encountered this alternative family. And she thought that there was potentially another path that Sanjena could take when she sees alternatives to kind of the nuclear family. And I wanted that to be the case. Like I want people, when they encounter this section of the book where there is the possibility for another way of like making and raising children, I want people to think that maybe it could be a good thing and maybe it could be a bad thing. And we don't know what's going to happen yet.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, like alternative approaches to like child raising and family structures and stuff. But I kind of come back in my mind to just like basic biology. I don't know. I probably don't know enough about it to be able to like speak with authority, but it just seems like, isn't this just how it's done? Like there's a coupling and then there's a baby, and I have
But
a friend
it's not anymore.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I have a friend who was raised in one of these like kind of elite urban cults, and someone wrote a book about it that was like really like it was like lavished with a lot of praise. This was a couple of years ago, and I'm totally
Which
blanking
one?
on. I forget the name of the cult, but it was basically like this sort of thing where you had. I think the cult was like founded by like a shrink or some sort of like PhD kind of guy who had like all kinds of thoughts about how the family structure worked, and he thought children thrived best when there were like multiple parents, and so kids would be born in this cult and then would be passed around from like some adults, and it didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, that's the twist to all of this, right? I am really interested in utopian thought experiments and like don't want to live in one. But I think that's something that I find really fascinating about cults, and like cults are kind of in this book everywhere. There are like small cultic organizations in the book. There's like a commune that Sanjena goes and stays on that is similar to a couple places that I visited when I was in India. And then there is like a kind of bigger cultish organization that she encounters. But the thing that I think is really interesting that we don't talk about when we talk about cults is that sometimes they have the diagnosis correct, right? They like name the thing in society that is wrong correctly, which is why people join them. And what they do with that knowledge, like the solutions they come up with, are abusive and high control and like not good and extremely damaging. But if we don't think about why they get people in the first place, then we are foolish because we are missing the reason that like people are isolated. It's the same kind of conversation I think we're having around like men in the manosphere, right? Like is there something that we need to understand about the root cause of the problem in order to understand what's happening? Yeah.
Like men are a mess. By the way, the term manosphere, it's a real thing. And I feel like I think you're right. Like there's something, I don't know if the manosphere is naming it necessarily, but they're a symptom of something that has gone horribly wrong with the way that we're raising young boys and young men. And I feel like there's an alienation and a maybe lack of education that's like not good for any of us, but is not good especially for these young guys who are like, I don't know. I just feel like my Instagram feed is just nothing but like dudes trying to tell you how to get ripped and like what supplements to take. And it's like, didn't used to be this way.
That's also
like,
my Instagram feed kind of, because
yeah.
I'm sort of a weightlifting bro. But the flip side of that. Yeah.
Oh, that's it. I mean, I can only see, I was going to say, I can only see like
Doesn't
from
show.
Yeah. But you're like, what kind of lifting are you doing?
No. I've done CrossFit for like 9 years, always heavily scaled, but I just power lift, and the only Olympic lift I really like is a clean and jerk. I don't like to snatch. Are you a weightlifter?
I mean, no, I have some dumbbells, but like I'm not like at the gym, like screaming and, lifting, extra. Because what's the best thing you're supposed to do? I feel like they say you're supposed to lift a lot of weight, but not a lot, but not that many reps. Is that the thing?
Yeah, that's training for pure strength. If you're training for hypertrophy, like to grow new muscles, which is kind of which is like the bodybuilder approach, and which I've been messing with just for the year, not because I want to look like a bodybuilder, but because my pure strength really plateaued, then you're supposed to lift at slightly lower weights and do more reps, like between 5 and 20. Whereas if you're lifting just for strength, you're doing like 1 to 5 reps usually.
I'm doing HIIT workouts. Is that okay?
Yeah, HIIT workouts that's what part of what CrossFit is that I really like. But HIIT workouts people often like them for like body comp, as they say. But that, I think for me, when I'm only doing HIIT, it's great for my like mood. Like it gets me something closer to what I think people feel when they feel runner's high. But if you want to like make gains, then HIIT is worse than pure strength, because you're kind of working at like your current capacity and you're not pushing your strength. I don't know if you care.
I know. I do care. I say this all the time on this show. Like, I'm the most impressionable person when it comes to health trends. Which is why the algorithm just like terrorizes me with like every single dietary and like exercise related trend, because I'll do them. I'll believe it. I'm going to sign up.
You should lift, bro.
I was going to say, I'm going to go to the gym.
I will say the flip side of this is like there's the quote manosphere, but then the flip side of it is like trad wives. And I also get some of those in my feed.
Oh, that's an interesting parallel.
Oh yeah, that's the new right.
Yeah, but it's like trad wives are the inverse of the manosphere.
Yeah, they totally are. And I think part of what's interesting to me about that is they are like I just wrote a piece about Usha Vance, and I've been reading the reissue of Andrea Dworkin's book on right-wing women, which is originally from the 80s. And then Sophie Lewis, who I was just talking about, wrote a book called Enemy Feminisms, where she talks about like the women who call themselves feminists who actual feminists are unhappy about. And the thing that I find interesting about like conservative women right now is similar to the sort of manosphere thing, where they are responding to something that is real. And there are some core beliefs that actually I share with them, which are like girl boss feminism didn't work. And if we think that like salvation for all women comes from the workplace, we're going to be unhappy. But like where we go with that information and that realization, we go in two really different directions. But I think that was something that I was interested in this book, because it's about women who all notice that the way that they are asked to give birth and mother is incorrect. And then they all have wildly different responses to the flawed way that they are asked to exist as women. And those wildly different responses put them in like different parts of the ideological spectrum, which I think is, it's why I think doubles and doppelgangers are interesting.
That's a very sophisticated take on like trad wives. But you're right. Like if we simply like dismiss these people as like internet kooks or something, we're kind of missing their humanity and missing something real that they're responding to. It makes a lot of sense to them, right? It's worth trying to understand it.
Yeah, and I think it's different than like, I'm not saying we need to do what I think we did in the first Trump presidency, which is say, like, let's hear from the humanizing moderate, because that's like how we got JD Vance, is we let him be this humanizing moderate who then switched when it was convenient. Like, this is not quite the same as saying like all voices are equal, like let's both sides it. This is sort of a like selfish novelistic approach that is like not about public discourse and more just about, I want to understand what it's like to be someone who isn't me. Like that's what being a novelist is for. And so I'm just interested in like where imaginative patterns are shared. And I think it's really helpful to be able to, again, on kind of just an artistic level, to be able to look at someone who's really unlike you and be able to have like an imaginative pathway that could help you put yourself in their shoes. That just means that you can be like a more polyphonic writer. So I think I'm saying something slightly different than like something about civic discourse and more just like an art point.
Like a creative thing.
Yeah, which is like selfish and not about making the world better.
But it kind of does, though. Like, even if that's not the intent, I think that creative work and that imaginative exercise and that like a good faith attempt to try to understand or to make sense of it and to embody it maybe on the page in some kind of character, like sometimes that's the best way to learn, is to see it rendered well in a fiction. Than it would be to like sit across the table from somebody at like a hostile Thanksgiving. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it's
totally.
It's like a safe space. But I'm curious. You mentioned that you wrote a piece on Usha Vance. Like, where is this piece? Like, who did you write it for?
Oh, I wrote this. It's like kind of an op-ed piece. It's not super long, but it's on Time. It's online at Time magazine. Yeah.
What's your take? I'm curious.
Well, I start with the fact that my mother's name is Usha, and Usha's name is Usha, and her dad has the same name as my dad, and then I like go through all these other similarities where like there's like we both were at Yale at the same time. We come from similar worlds, which are like kind of the intellectual, like privileged Indian American children thing, and I kind of the point I make is that a culture that kind of prizes high achievement, which I think is something that like that community, my community, is really guilty of, is going to produce someone who is potentially like a high achieving technocrat and like has no moral backbone, which is a point I've made about Vivek Ramaswamy before as well. Like it's not an accident that we got this person, because I think like internally in our community, we are very likely to just celebrate a person for getting to Yale or getting to Harvard and not say like what they should do there. And that is like a critique that I spent like book tour the first time making, because that book is about Indian America in like a kind of like fuller community sense. And then I think on the flip side, Usha Vance is also a good example of kind of like lean in feminism gone wrong. Like I think a lot of early articles about her wanted to see her as like the reasonable wife of JD Vance. Like she wasn't, he might say some things that are out there, but we got to have some respect for her. She's elegant, she's graceful. She went to Yale and Yale Law School. She was a Supreme Court clerk, and she started her clerkship 7 weeks after giving birth to her first child. Like, you got to have some respect for that. And actually, I don't think you do. I don't think it's a good thing to just blithely kind of say, like, women should uplift women and we shouldn't tear her down just because of who she's married to. I think we should absolutely tear her down because of who she's married to, especially because who she's married to is a man who would love to have a world where none of those things are possible. That's like even if that's not personally what he wants, like that is the vision of the world that he is pitching and like enacting slowly. So yeah, I was kind of making this pitch for like, let's look at the things that we have in common, not because they can like cheesily bring us together, but because they can tell us something about like what the ills of our society are. And the Naomi Klein book that came out 2 years ago, I don't know if you read it, Doppelganger.
I love that book.
Yeah.
I sing its praise. Like, it's one of the best best books I've read in recent memory. I feel like it really helped me to understand like the times that we're living in, as well as any book that I can recall reading like, as a work of nonfiction. But that's a brilliant book.
Yeah, I was making a lot of her points in like shallower form for Time magazine. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's like, I just like on a basic level, like what is Usher Vance? What is she doing with JD Vance? Like, he seems like such a dweeb. I don't know. It's like it's hard to square it, like how could she possibly be be in a relationship with this guy who, like you say, is a party to this movement and this administration that's like so like overtly racist and misogynist, and it's
I mean, she likes power and also a lot of privileged immigrants, and she comes from like a privileged Indian American background, as I do. Like, a lot of those are people who want to like shut the door behind them. Like, there's not an inherent solidarity between immigrant groups. Like, people are racist to other immigrant groups. So it's not confusing to me at all.
It's like, I got mine.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the attitude. And it's like I feel like very unclear on the way that somebody could be so well educated and then have some success in business, as like Vivek Ramaswamy, had in biotech or whatever. But then just, it's like this lust for power or something. And they're like, yeah, whatever moral considerations that the average person would make, I'm not making them. I'll do anything. I'll say anything to get the gold or whatever. And like, I guess that's human behavior. Maybe it's just more like, more common than I wish that it were. But I also like would love to, like, how, like, there have to be quiet moments where they're thinking to themselves, what am I doing? Or maybe not. Maybe there's none of that.
I just think people have always done versions of it. Like, I think if you like power, and you speak whatever language power, like whatever the lingua franca of power is at the time. And right now, a lingua franca of power is populism. And so you are speaking populism, and populism has become more and more virulent, but like, that's just what you are speaking. And it used to be, I think, that the lingua franca of power was something more neoliberal and like defending institutions that didn't always need to be defended. So that's how business people who wanted to go into politics talked half a generation ago. I actually don't think it's that different. I think that the difference is like difference is the shift to populism, not the people who are riding that wave.
So in a different era, what you're saying is that these kinds of people would be parroting like a different kind of language in order to, I guess that makes sense. And it's interesting to hear you like speak so eloquently about all of the, all of this stuff. And then to also be hearing about like your reading and the nonfiction that you're reading and the like feminist theory that you're reading, because it sort of points to all the thinking that undergirds your novel. I'm curious about like the way that you approach reading with respect to your fiction? Like, are you somebody who, though you write fiction, reads mostly nonfiction, or is it
No.
more of a blend?
No. I actually, when I do nonfiction, I often listen to it and I often am reading fiction. If I'm doing some like Sophie Lewis kind of stuff, if I'm reading like the Andrew Dworkin book that I was reading, I was physically reading it because I need to like mark it up because those are slightly more difficult texts. So I enter like a college classroom kind of headspace for that. But that kind of slots into like researchy reading for me. But like the Naomi Klein book was a book that I listened to and like devoured on Audible in, 2 days. But mostly I think I care a lot about mostly filling my head with like the cadences of fiction. And then nonfiction feels like a thing that like helps keep my mind alive, but is not. I'm very interested in novels of ideas. I love novels of ideas, but I also think the reason ideas are interesting to me is that the people who have these ideas are complicated and complicating. And so I'm most interested in approaching a novel of ideas as like not just kind of a conceptual project, like not like a Ted Chiang or a Borges story is like something that is about the idea and about the concept in itself. And I think I'm more interested in the kind of social realism that is, let's think about the ideas, but let's also think about the people who espouse those ideas.
So I forgot to bring this up earlier when we were talking about how funny your book is, but I don't want to get out of this conversation without talking about Zillow. Because there's these very funny passages where the Sanjena in the book, like the first doppelganger Sanjena, is like there's something autoerotic, shall we say, about her relationship to Zillow. And I guess like I don't know, there was something also. It's like a very like sharp satirical choice because like owning a home, like real estate is so crazy. Like the possibility of finding like housing, especially in any kind of city, it just seems like it's increasingly out of reach. Like the housing market is crazy. So it made some sense. It was kind of a commentary, even though it was, obviously like very jokey and funny.
Yeah, I think there's like a character, a note that people give on stories and novels often, which is like, I need to know what the character wants. And a thing that I'm interested in is like how complicated it is to say what we want and to act on what we want. And so if I get that note, I often bristle because I think, well, people don't just walk around the house wanting one thing. And it feels like a simplification. But then as I was thinking about that, I was like, well, one answer to that question is like, what turns her on, both sexually and also just emotionally. And so then I wrote the scene that you're talking about where she masturbates to Zillow.
I feel like I know, like in my social media life, there are like lots of people who sort of obsess over Zillow listings. I've gone down that rabbit hole. I mean, it's easy to do. It's like, just like, and I get like a lot of the algorithm has been feeding me a lot of these like €1 houses in Italy. Like you could own this home in this beautiful Italian village like they're giving them away. Do you ever get this?
I've seen those.
Yeah.
I mean, people literally call it Zillow porn. So there it is.
There it is. It's not, that's the thing. It's like pointing to something that's actually real or at least like
Mm-hmm.
close to real. And do I have it right? I have in my notes here that you were a high school debater.
Yeah.
I want to know more about like, cause we talked at the beginning about growing up in Atlanta. Do you come from an artsy family or no?
Well, my grandmother is a literary translator, and that she's like actually quite a celebrated literary translator. It's a career that she started, I think, after her husband died, and she got her PhD via correspondence while she was like raising four sons, and then now she translates from Malayalam, which is a South Indian language, into English, and she sometimes subtitles films. So she is like an artistic intellectual person, and her friends are artistic intellectual people. Some of them have passed away, but like I have a painting by one of her friends in my house that I really treasure. But I think my dad in particular has a lot of appreciation for literature, but he is a neuroscientist and a neurologist. My mom is also a physician. And I think for them, if you were going to study the arts in their generation of Indian people, it meant that you had failed the sciences. Like, it was not a good thing to study the arts from in their families. And so they became scientists. But I think, like, my dad is the kind of person who could have gotten a PhD in math and would have been very philosophical about it. When I went off to college, he wanted to borrow all my Plato textbooks that I didn't actually read Plato very thoroughly, but my dad said, please don't resell them because I want to read it. And I don't know if he actually did, but yeah, complicated relationship to the arts.
So yeah, and then here you are, this literary person and like a champion high school debater. Is this correct?
Yeah, I did win nationals.
You won like the national title?
I did win the national championship my senior year.
What were you debating?
That year, the topic was alternative energy. And I won on this morally dubious argument about like clean coal in China. There's no such thing as clean coal, but I was like defending clean coal. Did you read the Topeka School?
No.
So it's the Ben Lerner book that's about debate. He won a different kind of debate national championship, but there are some things in common.
Wait, there's multiple kinds of debate?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Very important. I'm actually working on with my friend, the novelist Andrew Ridker, and his sister Elena Ridker, who's a TV writer. The three of us are working on a sitcom called Master Debaters, and we're working with like an indie producer on it right now. We just got some notes on the pilot, so I've actually been thinking about debate again recently. But yeah, there are multiple kinds of debate. They're all kind of potentially morally sketchy. They could make you sort of a nihilist because they show you that you can defend anything. But also it makes your mind agile. I think people get into it because it's fun and maybe dangerously fun, and also because we're huge nerds. But it teaches you how to think.
I was going to say, like, it's interesting that, Ben Lerner is a high school debate guy, and you're a debater, and it does, like, and I just listening to you when we were talking earlier about like these issues around like family and politics and trad wives and everything. I noticed that there was like a thoroughness to your processing that squares with this idea that you were a high school debater. I'm sure you carry some of that stuff forward, right, into the way that you sort of like absorb information and the way that you think.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a liberal arts skill, and I think I am less fluent in writing argumentatively. I think I like think and present somewhat argumentatively, but I think novels are interesting because even when novels have a distinct point of view, even when they are novels of ideas that are kind of leveling social critiques, I think that the only honest way to write those kinds of books is to like give some good ideas to people you disagree with in the book, and make sure that if you find yourself sympathizing with one figure, one character in the book, you force yourself to inhabit those other characters so that there is like a rich enough conversation happening on the page. And that's not something that you get to do when you are only defending one idea. And it does require, in that sense, it's like inhabiting a bunch of POVs in debate, some of whom I disagreed with, is probably like something I'm directly doing on the page. But the writer Paul Harding teaches a Shakespeare class at Iowa, and I think he said, I didn't take the whole class, but I remember in one of the early classes he said that the thing that's great about Shakespeare is that he gave his villains some of the best lines, and I think that's like a thing that we should all remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you won the national title of high school debate, like, how does that even work? Like, is it scored in real time, or are there like judges who hold up numbers like it's like a beauty contest or something?
So in preliminary rounds at tournaments, there are usually 6 to 8 prelims, as we called them. You go through those, you win or lose, and one judge decides in each of those prelims. And you get to rank your preferences for judges. So often both teams are being judged by someone who they ranked relatively highly because they trust that person to be a good judge for them. But sometimes you can get a judge that you ranked low, and that's just the luck of the draw. but then you're seeded like March Madness. So you're seeded as you enter these 8 elimination rounds, or sometimes 4, depending on the tournament. And in elimination rounds, there are 3 judges. And so you have teams of 2 that debate in front of the 3 judges. And you give all your speeches. There's some cross-examinations. Things get really heated. And at the end of the round, the 3 judges all deliberate. They can call for evidence. They can say, like, you mentioned this article. I want to read that article for myself to make sure that you cited it correctly. And they deliberate. And then they each come up with their own votes, and it's like a best of 3. And they'll announce, like, it's a 3-0 decision in favor of, like, Northview High School or whatever. And so our decision in finals was a 2-1 decision. It was a split decision, which meant that they read out these ballots. And it was like, this person voted for one team, this person voted for the other team, and it all came down to this third person. It was very, very cinematic.
So you were part of a team. It was like your high school team. It was 2 of you. Mm-hmm. Is it on video? Like when they announced that you won?
I think it was on YouTube at one point. And the reason I know this is because the key thing about the kind of debate I did is that people speak at 300 words per minute. People speak really, really quickly as a way to get more information in. Like, people sound like auctioneers. And when I was in college, a couple of my friends found the video of me actually debating, and they found this so funny because, like, your breathing gets really weird. I still talk pretty fast, but it was like, 4 times this. And people found this video, and this was the era of, like, you would post something trolly on someone's Facebook wall, and like once a month someone would find this video and post it on my Facebook wall. Pretty embarrassing.
I'm curious about, like, the moment of victory. Like, did you fall to your knees? Like, what was, like, how do debaters celebrate?
I hugged my partner.
Oh,
I think that's what. Okay. And then and then you stand up and you, like, shake hands with the other team and you go, congratulations, or good debate, whatever. Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was in 2009. It was a while ago.
So, well, not that long ago. So you're growing up the daughter of 2 doctors, and you're the artsy one. But I mean, like, were you pushed as a kid? I'm curious to know, like, did you, like, if you're in this, like, science-y family, like, were you good at science and math? Was that something that no?
I was put in, do you know what Kumon is?
I was just going to ask you if you did Kumon.
Yeah.
You did Kumon.
I hated Kumon so much that this man named Mr. Kim, who taught us there, he would give us these math packets as homework, and I would go home and I would shove them up behind the couch. And I remember in 2nd grade, this was like the first set of lies I ever told, like the first set of lies of many that I told to my parents in my childhood. But for months, I'd been shoving these math packets behind the sofa, and I would come in and Mr. Kim would be like, "Where's your homework?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I don't know. And I don't know why he didn't immediately call my parents, but he didn't. And I was allowed to just keep coming in and just not know what was going on. And then one day, halfway through the 2nd grade, it became too much for me, and I burst into tears and confessed. And my parents were like, "It sounds like we should not have you do this anymore."
Kumon is not fair. Because, like, I live in Los Angeles. We have kids, and we're raising them. And, like, my daughter went to a elementary school that was mostly Korean kids, like, predominantly. And she was, like, not going to Kumon. And we're like, do we go to Kumon? Is this, like, a thing you've got to do? But we didn't do it. I don't know. I feel like, and I have a friend who's Indian, and he's the one who told me about Kumon, because he's like, "Oh yeah, I went to Kumon." He's like, "Oh, everybody goes to Kumon." I've never even heard of Kumon, but
I have a friend who's raising her stepdaughter in Palo Alto, and she told me that the Russian math cram schools are the new Kumon, at least in Palo Alto.
And it's just to, like, be like, it'll help you in math. Obviously, you'll be advanced.
You'll be advanced, but I think it's also like a statement on the lack of faith that a lot of immigrant families have in the way that people teach math and science here. Because in a lot of other countries, apparently, like in Russia and, like, former Soviet countries, and in lots of parts of Asia, there's just a lot more, like, rote drilling. And so when they see how we're taught in America, they just are like, "Oh, we have no faith. We better find an immigrant to
supplement
this." And also to, like, yell at them.
Yeah, get this done the right way. Get these kids whipped into shape.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm making a mistake. Maybe I should get my kids to Kumon, but my daughter hates math. And I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
between my
fine.
wife and I, there's not an ounce of DNA that's like math and science at all. So it would be kind of a farce, I think, if we tried to shoehorn her into becoming some sort of mathematician. But
It didn't work on me.
so, okay. So then you are probably, I mean, from an early age exhibiting that you're more of like a, what is it? Left brained, right brained? I forget which side
I
of the brain.
forget which one it is. My dad would know
Yeah.
because
Okay, let's get him on the line.
neurologist.
Let's call your dad. But whatever the side of the brain is that's like literary and artsy, that's more of you. How did I'm curious to know how your family responded to you, because reading Goddess Complex about this, like, daughter who's sort of the black sheep and is sort of like, you know, not the ideal, right? In terms of the way that she's conducting her life. Is there any
Yes.
crossover? Do you feel pressure?
I think my parents loved that I love to read because that's like the sign of a kid who's got a rich inner life. And yeah, I think people love when kids love to read. I think they got concerned when I wanted to write. And it wasn't like they're not like anti-intellectual. They were just afraid for me, and they had good reason to be. It's like really hard to live as a writer.
Yes.
And I think my mom in particular understood that to be a writer is to regularly sit with really uncomfortable feelings, and then to also like live kind of a financially precarious life. Even when you're doing pretty well, you don't know where the next paycheck is coming from always. And I think she saw those two things and like most parents worried about what it would be like to constantly have to kind of invent what your life could look like when there are easier ways to live. Like she often told me that I should be an orthodontist because she was like, that's a nice, stable job. And that was not her. I don't know that was necessarily even coming from a bad place. I think it was coming from a desire for her child to be safe.
Totally.
Yeah.
I feel like with a high school debate national championship on your resume, you would have been like thinking about law school, like, right? Wouldn't that translate well to being a litigator or something?
I was like on the surface good at debate, but I really struggled with parts of debate. It was like a kind of similar thing that happened in what we were talking about earlier about like my male voice as a writer. Debate was very male, even the women in it, like we all kind of presented as male as possible.
As male auctioneers.
Yeah, sort of. Like, because also if you're talking really fast and your voice pitches upwards, people don't like to hear higher pitched voices speaking at that speed. It sounds shrill. So a lot of us would artificially deepen our voices to sort of not get like bad points from mostly male judges. And there was you kind of have to hang, like it was kind of a boys club, and there were constant like really sexist jokes that you would just have to sort of laugh along to. I mean, you didn't have to, but like a lot of us just laughed along to because it was like the way to get along, which is pretty messed up. So I think I was pretty ready to leave debate. A lot of people do go on to debate in college, and I went to college. I went to a school that did not have a policy debate team. So I would kind of be like, I was like explicitly opting out.
Wait, Yale doesn't have a debate team?
They don't have a policy debate team.
Oh, policy debate.
Yeah, they have a different kind of debate that I knew I wasn't going to want to do.
Which is what?
Parliamentary. It's much more like speech and oratory and performative, and like, yeah, I was never going to be interested in doing that.
What kind of debate did Ben Lerner do?
He did extemporaneous speaking, where I'm pretty sure he did extemp is what we called it, where like you get a topic on the fly and you like come up with a speech, and you've done a lot of research in advance, but it's like that is a kind of debate that policy debaters don't have a lot of respect for other forums. Like, as I just made clear, I don't have a lot of respect for parliamentary debate, but I do have an enormous amount of respect for extemporaneous speaking. It's really hard.
And he was a national champion at that?
Yeah.
He won the title. Have you guys ever met?
No, we've never met.
I feel like this needs to happen.
I would love to meet Ben Lerner. Yeah, but I think I was really ready. And the truth is that all I ever really wanted to do was Right. I feel like that's true of a lot of us writers. I don't know. Did you want to do something else?
Other than write?
Yeah.
No. I
Yeah.
mean, I never thought of anything. As far back as I can remember, it was always something creative. It
Yeah.
just never seemed like anything else was fun or
Yeah.
interesting to me.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do?
Yeah. That was how I felt. So it was always going to happen. And I did journalism in college because it was like, seemed like a way to have a job as a writer. And like I said earlier, I wouldn't have gotten to write fiction professionally if I hadn't done an MFA. So,
And here you are,
here we are.
celebrating the publication of your sophomore novel. I always end by asking if my guest has anything else in the works. Are you working on a third book, or is that still
I
far
am.
off?
Yeah. I don't talk about novels in progress. So, are you superstitious?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if it's like, you don't know, because it could change. Like, I totally get it. But like, broad themes, broadly speaking, what are you interested in with this third book?
I will say that we have talked about some of the things that I'm interested in.
But you won't say what they are.
That's all I'll say for now.
Oh, so you're really superstitious.
Well, okay. The thing that I will say is some of the conversations that we were having about gender, because I mentioned this in an essay I wrote, which is that I wrote one novel in first person from a male POV, one novel in first person from a female POV, and I am messing around with multi POVs and like multiple genders and more types of voices in this project, which feels like a leveling up of ambition for me.
Okay. Well, we will end it there. It's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and congratulations on Goddess Complex.
Thank you for having me. It was the great honor of my life. It was actually really fun. It was really fun.
Okay, there we go. That was my conversation with Sanjena Sathian. Her new novel is called Goddess Complex. It's out there right now from Penguin Press. Check it out. Get your hands on it. It's called Goddess Complex. It's a wild ride. And if you want to find Sanjena Sathian on the internet, her website is sanjenasathian.com. She's on Instagram. She's got a Substack. She's all over the place. One more time, the new novel is called Goddess Complex. Read it. So what else? Don't forget to subscribe to this show wherever you listen. Hit the subscribe button. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media, Blue Sky and Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter over at Substack. If you love this show, if you appreciate the work that I do, then join the Other People Patreon community over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Help keep this show going into the future. If you want to join my book club or get an Other People t-shirt, head on over to the show's official website, otherppl.com. And don't forget to check out my new company. It's called Deep Dive. The website is www.deepdive.audio. And the company specializes in long-form educational audio courses. The debut course is launching later this year. It's called How to Write a Novel. I'm the host. 50+ hours of instruction from dozens of leading writers. Very exciting. If you have 2 minutes and you want to do me a quick favor, please give this show a rating wherever you listen. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, what have you. Rate it, review it. It helps the show find new listeners. So coming up on Thursday, I will be back once again with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, my weekly foray into popular culture with Mira Gonzalez. Mira is a millennial. I'm a Gen Xer. She's young. I'm old. She knows a lot about pop culture. I'm kind of middling, and she teaches me things, and we discuss. It's a hangout show. It's loose. It's informal. It's slightly inappropriate. Mira gets very stoned and somehow manages to be functional verbally. It's fascinating. Check it out. Brad and Mira for the Culture coming up on Thursday. Stay tuned.